You are limiting your story by forgetting about one important aspect of every single piece of writing. Fiction, nonfiction, memoir, it all has this. And I'm not talking about plot, even though it is easy to forget and to think that they're the same thing. So the plot refers to the events of the story, what happens. Then we have the way those events are relayed to the reader, and that's the structure. And we all remember this from high school English class, right? We remember talking about plot and structure and seeing the diagrams. But then as writers, it's really easy to fall into this rhythm where we've been doing it for a while and we kind of have the way we do things, and we forget to question things and to ask, is this really the best way for me to approach this specific story? So that's kind of what I want to go through today. I want to talk about structure and the different elements of it, why it's important, what it is, and all the elements that we need to look at and question as writers for every single manuscript, every story, because they're all different. Because here's the deal. Now, stick with me on this metaphor, y'all. Plot is water. It is the vast ocean, but you can't give someone the ocean, right? So you have to figure out some way to contain it. So how will you contain it? Are you going to put it in a mug and hand it to somebody? Put it in a swimming pool and let them dive in? An aquarium, a fishing pond? It's all the same water, but the way that the person experiences it is completely different. All right, y'all. It is a beautiful East Tennessee fall morning. Take a deep breath. You've made it to the writing woods. Here there is no pressure, there is no stress. We are just hanging out, talking about writing. I've got a cup of tea. I've got my dog back there hanging out. I hope you're somewhere comfortable and feeling good and ready to discuss this thing that we all love. When it comes to structure and plot, you have to make a choice about the way that your plot is contained and presented to the reader. And if you don't make a choice, if you don't think intentionally about it, it is gonna get dumped into some kind of receptacle anyway. The act of writing the book puts your plot in a container, and that's how the reader is going to experience it. The way your plot is presented completely changes the reader's experience, the way that they interact with your story. And I know I have certainly had moments where I have chosen structural elements not because I really thought it was the best thing for the story, for the plot that I was presenting, but because that's the way I've always done it. And you kind of start to put yourself in a box as a writer after a while, because I always do this, I always do that. That's what I'm comfortable with. And it gets really hard to step outside that comfort zone. And this month, I'm going to be talking quite a bit about stepping outside of our comfort zone. That's something that I'm always working on as a writer. So I hope that y'all are ready to go there with me. So when I'm talking about structure, there are really two big buckets that I'm going to dump these elements into. The first is going to be scene sequencing, and then the second is going to be POV and narrator. So as a developmental editor, when I'm giving feedback on manuscripts and making recommendations about revisions, I really deal with that first bucket a lot. There are generally some things in that realm that need to be looked at. The second bucket I will give recommendations on, but much more sparingly and always with some thought. I put thought into all of my suggestions. They're never made just willy-nilly. But making POV recommendations, I really have to feel like I understand what the author was going for, what their intention was, what they want for this story. Because changing it is a lot of the time less objective. It's less about what will make the story better and more about what will make this the story you want to tell. I do feel like I'm rambling a little bit this morning. I think I have some of Rocket's chaos energy. If you stuck with me this far, thank you. Let's roll on. I've got a little list here of the different elements that I want to talk about. And as we're talking about them, I want you to kind of think about your story, whatever you're working on, and think about these elements. Have you really considered them for this specific story? And to be clear, this is novels, memoir, short stories. I don't care what you're writing. This applies to all of them, because none of these things Not one of these elements has to do with the actual events of the story. If you're writing memoir, you can tell the actual story without changing a single thing and change every single one of these elements I'm about to talk about. Like a bat out of hell. There you go, buddy. Alrighty. Okay, so the first thing is what most of us probably think of right off the bat when we talk about structure, and that is the actual order of the scenes. So how are you going to order them? Chronologically? Are you going to have flashbacks, flash forwards? This is one of those things that we usually just default to chronological and call it good, but it's worth thinking about. You can maybe get overly creative with this. I feel like I've tried to do that sometimes when I'm writing something and I get all excited about a structure and I think it's going to be, the bee's knees. And I start writing it. I'm like, this is just confusing. We're always kind of walking that line between being creative without confusing the reader. Because a confused reader can't be an invested reader. But this is one of those things that, play with it. And I would say that for pretty much every structural element. Play with it. What's the worst thing that happens? It doesn't work. And then you get to change it back and try again. Okay, we have the order of the scenes, and then we have the rocket. Oh my gosh. Chaos energy. I'm telling you. Okay, so we have the order of the scenes, and then we have the start and end point. Where are you going to start the story? Where are you going to end the story? And this is another one of those things that we usually just kind of do it without giving it much thought. We'll start at the beginning. Okay, but is the beginning really the beginning? And as a developmental editor, I can tell you that a large percentage of the time, writers tend to start too early. And honestly, when you're drafting, there is nothing wrong with that. Just start where it's comfortable, and you can always cut, but definitely during the revision stage, I would have a look at it and really consider, am I starting too early? And honestly, I can make a whole video on this topic alone, about where to start. So figuring out where your story starts and where it ends is a big, massive part of the structure, right? You are actually literally bounding the story that your reader will experience. Next, we have subplots. And by this, I'm talking about how much page space do you allocate to your subplots? Honestly, how much page space do you allocate to anything is part of the structure. But subplots in particular, they could be a really big part of the story, or they could just be flybys. And we would call that pacing. So the time that you spend on different parts of your story is what determines the pacing from a structural perspective. Now, pacing is really interesting because you'll find that when I talk about my different editing services, I will kind of list, what each one covers. And pacing usually winds up on every list. And so I have to kind of explain to authors sometimes what that means, because you have different types of pacing in your story, right? So you have pacing at the line level. Are you writing quick, snappy sentences that really move the reader through the story? Are they covering a lot of ground in one page? And that's not to say it's good or bad. That's just an objective look at just what the pacing is. This, for example, is a quick pace. He is covering a lot of ground. Aren't you, bud? So the pacing at the line level, at the prose level, how quickly the reader is moving through the scene, how much ground they're covering. And then you have the pacing at the chapter level. And then you have the pacing at the scene level. How quickly are your scenes moving? Are they short? Are they long and drawn out? And same thing with your chapters. And then the pacing of your entire book. How many scenes are you dedicating to a certain subplot or concept? How many really internal reflecting scenes do you have versus action scenes? Not necessarily, car chases and shootouts, but action as in something is happening externally that is driving the plot forward. That's going to change the pacing at the structural level. And a really good indicator of this is word count. And I know a lot of us really don't like talking about word count because, oh my goodness, our art, how dare you try to contain it with your arbitrary numbers. It's not the most fun part of the writing process. But if you have a book that is, cracking 100,000 words, then it's certainly worth looking at your pacing, because it might need to be trimmed down a little bit. And that's not just because of the publishing considerations, the money considerations, but a story that is getting real long a lot of times has not been edited so that it moves at a good pace, a pace that will keep the reader invested and interested and turning pages. And you sci-fi and fantasy folks, I'm not talking to you. You have your own rules. You know what you're doing. All right, now that brings us to POV and narrator. And this is the stuff that it is so easy to get caught up in what I have always done, what you have always done as a writer, rather than what this individual story needs. So for me, I have always written in third person with very few exceptions, usually short stories. I would kind of try out first person and see how it felt, but I never liked it. I never liked writing in first person. I have always written in third person limited. So I was working on a book and I could not get it to work. I was just losing my voice, losing my POV character. I was scrambling. And I found that when I started a scene in first person and then switched to third, I was getting the voice and it was feeling good. And then I would write for a while and I would lose it and I would have to do that again. And finally, I stopped. And I thought to myself, what are you doing? If you have to write in first person in order to get the voice, why don't you just write in first person? I think even Rocket was looking at me going, what are you doing? Just write in first person. So sometimes just think about what you're doing. Think about if it actually works and just listen to your instincts. Don't fight them for the sake of doing what you think you're supposed to do. Okay, the other element that obviously has a massive impact, and I don't know if we think about it enough, is our POV character or characters. So whose story is this? And sometimes we go in assuming one thing, and that might change. Once we start fleshing out the story, that might not be the best way for the story to be told, or the way to tell the story that we want to tell. Let me say that again because I feel like that didn't make a lot of sense, but it's important because there is no objective best way to tell a story. It doesn't exist. Every decision, every change that we make, we are deciding what story we want to tell. And yes, there are objective things that can make a story better or more engaging, but that's not really what we're talking about right now. So choosing your POV character, are you going to do dual POVs where the chapters flip back and forth between two characters' perspectives? You can do multi-POVs where you have kind of a full cast experience. There are so many options. And you don't have to limit yourself. If I'm getting one thing through in this video, I want it to be that. I want you to feel right now like you have the world, feel like you have all of these options at your disposal. You're the writer. You get to pick. You're not limited. You're not stuck. And it's not about making choices for the sake of being different to try to stand out. If that's why you're making the choice, it's probably not going to be the best thing for your story. You should make the choice that you truly believe is for your story, for the story you want to tell. But don't feel like you can't make that choice if it's different. Even as a professional editor, I have recommended before a mix of first and third person in one story. Now, I thought for a long time before recommending that because there are a lot of potential downsides to doing that. But for that particular story, I felt like it was the right move. And you can't see me. I know. I have a feeling that Rocket's more fun to look at anyway, so that's okay. All right. Good boy. Good boy. We love you. Everyone loves you. With your POV characters, you also get to choose how close your POV is going to be. And my goodness, that's another video all on its own. But are we deep inside their mind? Or is it more distant? Is your POV character the narrator? Or is there a separate narrator? How much is revealed about their internal experience? Do we know a lot about what's going on inside them, or is it separate? How much information is withheld? And if you do have a separate narrator, what is their perspective like? What is their tone like? Think about a book like Emma by Jane Austen, where the narrator truly seems to despise the protagonist and has this really snarky take on the protagonist. That stuff completely changes the way the reader experiences the story. Completely. It's a different story. You change one of those aspects and you have a totally different story. Is the narrator reliable? Can we trust what they're saying? Now, so far we've talked about the overall structure. Each scene also has its own structure, and it's really important to do that intentionally as well. The structure of each scene should be based on the plot, not the other way around. And we see that so often, where we lay out the structure of a scene first and then fit the events into it. So leave a comment for me if you want to see a video on structuring scenes. Okay, so that was a lot, and I know we kind of kept it surface level, but Rocky's getting tired. You can see he's waiting. So remembering that everything we just talked about is completely separate from the plot. If you were writing memoir, every single one of those elements could be changed without disrupting the actual events, without disrupting the accuracy of the memoir. And I have people ask me that all the time with developmental editing. Well, how do you do developmental editing on memoirs, on nonfiction? There's a lot to look at that has nothing to do with the events, with the plot. And like we say, remember that your plot is the water, your plot is the ocean, just infinite possibilities. And by choosing these structural elements, by making these decisions, you are creating a container for your plot, a way for your reader to hold and experience it. So instead of just doing things the way we've always done them just because, let's spend some time and actually think through what is the best choice for this specific story. And if it's different, if it's intimidating even, try it. Just give it a try. See what happens. The worst that can happen is it not working. And one of my favorite things about writing is that we get unlimited goes at it. We don't have to get it right on the first try. We get to revise and edit until it's something that we're proud of. And when it comes time to revise and edit, all these structural elements have a really important place in the process. There's a specific framework that developmental editors use to edit efficiently. And honestly, all writers should really adopt it as well. It just saves you so much time and energy and will maybe keep your hair intact a little bit longer. So check out that video if you want to learn how to edit efficiently.